So with that, I will introduce our closing keynote, Marisa Jahn, who is someone who I've known for quite some time. Marisa is an artist, filmmaker, and transmedia producer of Ecuadorian and Chinese descent. She co-designs public artwork, civic media tools, installations, films, architectural, and urban scale collaborations with youth, new immigrants, and working families. Her work has engaged millions throughout strategic partnerships such as the New York Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, the American Museum of Natural History, Seattle Public Library, Seattle Public Housing Authority, PBS NewsHour, and National Domestic Workers Alliance. Her work has been presented at the United Nations, Tribeca Film Festival, the White House, and the Venice Biennial of Architecture, and broadcast via the New York Times, CNN, Univision, Art in America, PBS, and hundreds more. She's currently a senior researcher at MIT. This is an important achievement, which is her alma mater, and Sundance Fellow. She has taught at Columbia University, MIT, where I've experienced her work, and Parsons, the New School. So thanks, Marisa, for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. And we're going to start with a short 2-minute video that will Thanks, Alyssa. So I am, the question of this presentation, or the conversation that I want to have with you all is, what makes this literacy movement so sticky, and how, what are the key takeaways so we can think about replicating or scaling literacy movements that are galvanizing for kids and exciting, and what can we draw from, I'm going to focus on Honduras in particular. And to give you some context for the work that I do, sometimes as an artist, I'm working on small scale. I love making books. I've been doing that for decades. Sometimes the work that I'm doing develops in scale, such as Care House on the left, which is the United States' first care-based co-housing project, which will open, the first will open in Baltimore in 2024, with Rafi Segal, who's at MIT in the School of Architecture and Planning, and Ernst Valery, who's a real estate developer. So I'm often both, I'm working across photographic media, I'm working across two-dimensional scales, I'm working on systems design, and that scales to an architectural and urban scale as well. And they often start from very personal questions. And one of the things that I'll loop back around to in this presentation is this question of identity and alterity or otherness and liminality. So I like this quote by Victor Turner, where he says, we are most free to explore identity in places outside our normal routines, places that are in some way betwixt and between. So in this series, I am exploring these idea of mirrored masks and how we see ourselves reflected or distorted in the other, and what that affords. Sometimes the work, well, I want to extend the idea of identity and this heightened sense of identity also to vehicles, which are really exciting. This is one of the mobile studios that I created. I say it accelerates the movement for domestic workers' rights. And I created with the National Domestic Workers Alliance in 2012. This was our vehicle, the Care Force One, which is a even older vintage car. Both we crisscross the countries and we pop up into public spaces where domestic workers and employers gather. So for example, farmers markets, toddler storytime hour at the library, to worker centers, to after school at playgrounds. Interested in ways, frame tales and structures that convene and are exciting and draw people together, and I meet people where they're at. Sometimes, in this case, oftentimes it's literal. So the question again here is, how can you get kids invested in storytelling and strengthen their creative and civic agency, which really happened in the Bibliobandido project in its North American, Central American context. Video and you're joining late, then you can find the video, as well as which you can download, as well as a lot of other resources, including how to build your own Bibliobandido, and those are at bibliobandido.org. So some of the, one of the success of this project is due to our really key collaborations. I'm currently an artist in resident in the Brooklyn Public Library, and I've worked a lot with Juan Rubio in the Seattle Public Libraries. And what I really look for are partners that are excited by creativity to help drive literacy. And in each place, the legend of the story-eating villain, whose appetite we have to appease, takes on a different character. So in the Seattle Public Library, we combined this legend with paper circuitry to introduce basic electronics and coding. So in Honduras, it's one of the key things that people want to learn and strengthen is handwriting and orthography. So things take on their own legend and flavor and kind of take on these new kind of mythological dimensions, which is really fun. And sometimes there's a spatial component. So this was when we brought it to Central Harlem, This was a museum that's inside a public, adjacent and part of the same building of a public housing complex. And here we wanted the space to feel like you're inside the belly of this Bibliobandido. And it felt kind of fleshy, or like the forest, where the kids were narrating the video. And that gets kids exciting. And, when I'm with librarians, when we bring it to a library, for example, or with, in this case of this museum, I do a lot of coaching with the key nodal people who are going to be interfacing with the public. And I'm learning from them. And what I'm kind of carrying on are lessons I've learned about what makes this legend exciting and how to get into the story. So, I say to these teen docents, I say, for example, well, let's not explain what the project is about. Ask the kids to explain what they feel like. They watch the video first, ask them what it reminds them of, put them in the place where they're also part of the legend bearers. And how do you do that? So these are recent images from the Brooklyn Public Library. And I think actually this weekend, they just did something in the Cortelio branch. So the pedagogy that I'm leaning on and that I found relevant here was Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, right? And so the idea here with Bibliobandido is that oftentimes we're teaching verbal linguistic and mathematical logical modalities to K through 12 use. And if we can leverage these other kinds of intelligences, then it then taps into and shoehorns into verbal and mathematical modalities. And I should say that really this year I'm celebrating my 25th year of teaching K through 12. I teach on a university level, but I'm always also mentoring and teaching and creating curricula for K through 12 youth. And my particular focus before I went to Honduras to co-create this living legend was in teaching literacy through art. And in particular, my focus was youth from historically underserved communities, which means that there's a lot of English language learners, for example. So for whom, doing dramaturgy or play acting or the haptic experience of bookmaking is really important to have one thing to, like, pique your interest and give you a foothold into literacy. At the same time, though, I do think that this framework of using different kinds of intelligence are really important for kids from many different contexts. So I've taught this in the Upper West Side in New York City, where there's great public schools and great private schools, and yet still there's people with kids with learning challenges, literacy challenges specifically. So it makes it really fun. So to dive a little bit into this project in Honduras and what this looked like, I will say first that the community that invited me to do this project is based in northern Honduras in a rural community. And when they invited me, they said, you have to come. We know that you do literacy through bookmaking workshops, and we have the library in northern Honduras. And you have to come and see it and teach something and do something. And our teachers, our students are hungry for different ways of teaching this. And so I went and I saw that their bookshelf was, well, their library is one bookshelf long. So then the question here was, how do you instill a culture of self-publication and get kids to continue teaching these and expand on it so that after I leave, it's replicable. And in that short video that you saw, we created this character and we performed it on the road of Dal, and people believed the character was real, and it was in a context where it was pre-internet. It was there was a few cell phones. There was not really there weren't very many televisions, so the experience was really vivid for people. And someone you may have seen, or you might remember, there's a short clip of and the police in there, and part of what made the legend a legend was because someone called the police, and for people in El Pital, the police never come. So if the police come, this must be a real menace. So it just kind of built the legend. And so to give you some context, broader context of how this project really stuck for the past 12 years, I should say in 2008 is when I first went to go meet these youth, and I did this bookmaking workshop, and I had this question about how to make this project stick. And then I came back in 2010 and we co-created this idea. I had the seed of an idea of this bandit who eats stories, and then we developed into this whole thing that we then performed. And it's also interesting for this question that I'm exploring here, is that for about a year and a half, I didn't know whether the project had really stuck, because we're so remote and we were not in regular phone contact. And one day, a year and a half later, one of the key organizers had gone down the hill, and she gave me a phone call, and I asked her what's up, and she said, "Oh, it's Bibliobandido week." And I was like, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, the first week of every month is Bibliobandido week. On the first Wednesday, we create new stories and episodes, and we enact them with one of the 19 surrounding pueblos the following Sunday. And it's always in collaboration to build the capacity of one of the 19 surrounding pueblos." So really, this community had run with this project, and it is still going on today. So in Honduras, what's perhaps some irrelevant background information is that the term Banana Republic originally refers to Honduras, and this term refers to countries that are giving natural resources to colonial or global north countries in this case. For many years, the US has had its hand in Honduras has acted as a staging ground for the US. And you still see specters today of what that looks like. Some other context is that for many years, it still is on the eastern side of Honduras, is where there is drug trafficking. And in where we are in the context of El Pital, which is northern Honduras, it registers not so much as in, you might see a little bit of that, but the way that it registers is that if something is strange or amiss, then you just don't ask questions. And sometimes under certain political regimes or presidencies, it feels there's a kind of a trickle effect where you're not sure what you're supposed to say. So it takes its toll in terms of freedom of speech. So here is Reporters Without Borders, who is identifying Honduras as a difficult situation for reporters. For many years, it was considered one of the most dangerous places for journalists after an environmental activist, Berta Cáceres, was murdered. Now actually it's Mexico. So things are changing in terms of freedom of speech, and the new president is introducing a new kind of optimism that can be felt there. So here's the region where this project takes place. It is outside of La Ceiba, which is one of the major cities here in the north. And it's along this little river here. And this is where it says El Pital, very blurry. The way that the kids are disseminating this project now. Before they used to have a bus, they sold it in the pandemic for, they needed the money. And the kids walk to these, and like when I say they walk 7 hours to go teach this project in other communities like Yoruca, Rio Viejo, for example. So the GDP of families in rural Honduras is about $1,200 to $2,400 a year. 80% rely on subsistence farming. And 1/3 of the adults from the remote regions in this area, like Cuenca Cangrejal, have emigrated to the US to find gainful employment and send money home. So this is Danny on the right. Danny is one of the youth that I first taught in 2008, and he is still teaching some of the bookmaking techniques that I taught him, and he's now 22, and he's an amazing community organizer and leader. And this is his grandfather who raised him. Danny's mother lives in the US, and she can't cross back, but she sends money home. So his grandfather is the major provider for his extended family. And they have a farm, a couple of small plots. In 1998, there was Hurricane Mitch, really wiped out a lot of the infrastructure in this region. And then what that means is that, so this is on the road to some of the more remote rural regions. And these arroyos will flood. There'll be these flash floods, and it'll knock out bridges, and it makes it really impossible. So like if you can imagine what this threadbare educational infrastructure looks like, a teacher will take a school bus from La Ceiba up to these areas and teach in a one-room schoolhouse, and it might take them 2 hours to get to 2 or even 3 hours one way, and they might have to ford a river. So with global warming, the severity of storms makes it so that the education is even all the more fragile. So the food insecurity issue is also at play here too. So for example, when I was there in March and I was interviewing local people in the local community, and farmers like in this, what is a biodiverse region, and it's a tropical rainforest where there's like monkeys and kinkajous, and it's just absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. And the effects of climate change really register because it means that there's the weather is less predictable, and so it makes it harder for farmers to farm, and sometimes their crops are just unpredictably wiped out, so they can't anticipate properly. So, and at the same time, there's the people who visit this El Pitalen are kind of amazed at the strength of mutualism that is really high. So, and some of the literature on mutualism says that mutualism grows during crises like the recent pandemic to fill unmet basic life needs. It exists between private and public sectors, but may also then influence and be absorbed by public and private sectors. And these are important to know because in the context of, especially the previous presidency, where there was just a power vacuum or a lot of governmental corruption, and just resources weren't being provided to schools, in this gap, arises kind of mutualistic society to create these, to fill this desire and the right for education. So, but one thing that I find missing in the literature about mutualism is that it doesn't mention the role of imagination. And so I'm going to share with you what this means. So this is Koki on the left, who is also a farmer. And he is the original Bibliobandido, and he does not want you, now know this And so I'm gonna play this while I narrate, and hopefully you can see the video. So Koki had to leave school in about first or second grade, and he always wanted to go to school, but he was in his large family, he had to go work in the fields. And so when I met him, he's my age, he's in his 40s. And when I met him, he was a member of this club they were tending to this one bookshelf library, and they were creating these different programs that they wanted to jumpstart. So he would take time out of his day and would volunteer to be part of this literacy club because he still wanted to be able to read and write, and he wanted his kids and the kids of El Pital to be able to read and write. And you know, if you ask different people in this community, what effect did this have on Koki's life? People say, you know, he was really a different person before he played this character, and he guarded this role really zealously. He is somebody who was, you know, in his family, there's a history of drinking, for example, but playing this role had really stopped that for him. And so he, you know, I think in this short clip, you saw that it's a small enough town where the kids and adults, we kind of did a reunion tour. After 2 years, he had to stop playing this role of Bibliobandido because his family obligations, he has 8 kids, and his farming was too much. So he laments not being able to play this role still. But everybody knows how him. It's a picture that we took of him back in 2010 on his kind of mantelpiece. And so we did this kind of reunion tour where he got to be Bibliobandido again. And everybody knows that he is Bibliobandido, but people pretend like they don't know who it is. So for example, after we shot this, there was a clip in there that you saw, kind of a moonlight shot, and it was really hot. And we were walking back from filming, and I said, Koki, do you want to take off your mask, your bandana, because it's hot? And he said, no, because everyone will know who Bibliobandido is. And so he then continued to walk back until we were behind the schoolhouse, and then he, you know, changed into his regular civilian clothes. Collective self-transformation in this case with Koki is like people, it's rewarding to them, and also, you know, as you saw in the video, these kids also have different roles that they get to play too. So again, this quote that we're most free to explore identity in places outside of our normal routines, places that are in some way betwixt and between. There's something also really transformative in this context for the character to be villainous and not nice. In other contexts and communities, he's different, and sometimes he's like a happier Bibliobandido. In this case, they, you know, in this era, this is the era when he was really mischievous and really thrilling for kids. So this is Danny, and I mentioned again that he had been, his original.
Y continuamos haciendo libros y trayendo el proyecto a otras comunidades y pueblos que también necesitaban un bibliobandido. Después de 2 años, el formato del bibliobandido cambió un poco.
Era cotidiano. No teníamos miedo.
Entonces imaginamos algo nuevo.
Tercer domingo de mayo y estábamos al lado de la carretera esperando al bibliobandido por su cosecha mensual. pero teníamos nuestros libros preparados en una bolsa porque cuando él viene tiene ganas de comer libros.
Yo también estaría muy hambriento si no me hubieran dado comida todo un mes.
Oímos desde lejos los cascos de un caballo. Pero cuando vimos, no era el bibliobandido. Era una mujer que venía en marcha de su caballo hacia la comunidad y se acercaba rápidamente. No supimos si era una heroína o una villana.
Teníamos.
So that was a clip of Danny when he was 9. And so what I like about it, the reason why I chose this clip is because you see that the kids, there's a lot of, I mean, exactly this, like the sense of creative and civic agency. You know, you decide it's like you make up your own adventure. You decide the narrative. It's like, oh, well, you know, got too quotidian. It wasn't like mischievous enough, or it wasn't like exciting, you know, and so people just make up a new, add a new character. They just make up a new narrative and so forth, or do the ritual, but change it one little bit. So this is a film still from the clip that we were filming these kids who were walking 7 miles one way to go teach a Bibliobandido workshop in Rio Viejo. And then they walked 7 miles home. And was really unbelievable. They were so well organized. And what was interesting was that there wasn't like this, just like the sense of, I don't know quite the word, but, you know, immediately not questioning their authority to speak, and not questioning and assuming kind of their full power as like teachers themselves, passing on what they had learned. And what's also really incredible is that the kids in El Pital, I mean, again, this is all low income, you know, it's like the 3rd poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and all the more so in this rural area. But the youth in El Pital, they don't perceive themselves as being in a deficit. They really frame their world as having abundance, and that's reinforced when they go to Rio Viejo, where there's a slight economic difference, and they feel like they're bringing educational capacity building resources to this community and their parents and that teacher. So why does storytelling matter, and why does creative agency matter? You know, so this is Allison, who was one of the individuals who I then did a teacher training to. She's about 13 years old, and she was leading the workshop here. She's sitting at the desk. And she is one of the key people. So in La Ceiba, when they want people to represent, when there's a kind of a city council or regional kind of council hearing, and they want people from the rural areas to give feedback about an initiative or hear about what's going on, then they call the NGO that's here in El Pital called Un Mundo, and they, you know, the organizers there, like Danny, bring their youth down to the regional governmental center. They hear from people like Allison about what is affecting people in the rural regions. So there very much is this sense of civic agency, and you know, all the things that we want in community journalism. So we want to hear from nuanced perspectives, and it's essential to bolstering an informed democracy. So, you know, here I think where I heard over and over again that the kinds of things that take place in Bibliobandido are just not like the kind of rote education that they receive, which is another reason why this project really stuck there. So on the left, you know, the teachers had said, well, we need a character who, the kids love writing stories. And those of us in education know that it's harder to get a kid to go back and edit their work. But then actually it becomes really rich. So La Inspectora, the inspector, she loves grammatically tidy sentences, and she comes and she kind of like organizes and arranges people's stuff, and she gets kids excited about editing. On the right is a character. This is the costume I was prototyping, Mr. Mismatch, which in Spanish is Señora Mal Cruzada. And it's for, this character is for, in El Pital, they're using it with their younger kids. We also were actually prototyping it in Massachusetts at Horizons for Children, which is for children who are unhoused in, throughout Massachusetts, 93 branches. And this character, so it's like pre-literacy. This character is also a story eater, but loves rhythm and rhyme, and colors, and can't keep a beat. And so she's similarly kind of, you have to nourish and make sacrifice of your patterns and so forth. So they're using it in their special education in LP. And I think this is the last module, last kind of takeaway here, and it's really about ritual and reconnection. So here I'm kind of drawing on these questions about mutualism that run high in El Pital. So, and what I mean by that, here I'm going to pause and jump to a different example of a project. I'm working with Sarah Santon, who is the Dean of Nursing at Johns Hopkins, and we are engaging in a study, I as an artist in resident, she as a nurse activist, some say, and we are looking at what we call, and what she's written about, structural resilience. So structural resilience meaning how, rejecting this individualist myth of, an individual pulling themselves by their bootstraps, and instead looking at, well, what does it look like in different communities to be resilient? What does this look like in terms of public space? What does this look like in terms of the social roles? What is it that people play? What does it look like in terms of the civic bodies and kinds of organizations that arise, or mutualistic organizations? And so one of the things in our interviews, Black families in Baltimore, is we are looking, well, one of the things that consistently has come up for these olders is a cleanup club. So for example, in some areas in Baltimore where the sanitation, there's not consistent sanitation pickups, for example, and there's times where simply there was not running water in the 50s and 60s for families that live there. Sometimes there was just, inconsistent or negligent attending to basic sanitation needs. And then in that lacuna, then what families did in many parts of Central and East Baltimore was they would create these cleanup clubs. So that is, you push your trash out, you sweep your area, and you push it down a few houses. You might do your neighbors as well. And then the next group of houses then pushes their detritus a few houses down until it gets down to like the pit, garbage pit kind of thing. So it's not only the weekly practice, or, it might be twice a week where people are cleaning up and there's a visible and reminder of this, but then it's also coming to the street and this kind of intergenerational mixing between olders and youngers. And there's basic, so for example, we heard from many people, oh, the woman who's a school teacher lived on my block because of racial segregation and redlining, actually. So people, like, even if you were middle class Black, you could not move into a different neighborhood so easily. So there's a lot of mixing. And that school teacher would provide after school homework help to the kids in the neighborhood who would need it, and so forth. And so is this idea of like ritual and reconnection that we that also is high as well in El Pital. And the thing that's really fascinating is that many of the people that we interviewed, it was not only, these kind of practices still take place. So for example, this is in Johnston Square. This is Reverend Silver and his wife Inez and Miss Jeanette. And they're still doing a cleanup club, block club. Jeanette's the block leader. And so it's, it's not only this idea of the instrumentalist act of cleaning up, of teaching. It's, it's building these civic pathways and these neural pathways that persist throughout life, which is really incredible to see. So these are some of the questions that we're starting to think. This is one of my collaborators, Rafi Segal, in this forthcoming book called Design and Solidarity. And what that looks like in Hospital is this kind of redundancy, network redundancy. And here's where it kind of is directly related to this idea of connected learning summit, and many of the work that we all here do. So yeah, what do these redundant kind of nodal people look like? And how do we, this was a really key thing for having the educational component succeed in Hospital so well. So what's next for the Bibliobandido project? So we are working on a documentary film. This is some of my crewmates. We got a small seed grant from Sundance to go do this filming in March. We're really threading together education access and the right to education with climate change and so. Then here also I threw in this map because I had known what this topography was like, but until this past trip, I didn't know that it has been part of a these national Pico Bonito and En Nombre de Dios. So I'm also working on a children's book, which I've been writing over the past few years, and I'm working on the illustrations. And then Bibliobandido is coming to Canada, coming up in October. And so this is little snippets of what the book looks like. I'm really looking at kind of interactive examples of snippets of narratives, but that all sneakily get kids excited about sneakily adding in stuff into the book itself. There's some kind of Mad Lib moments in the books. So that's been really fun to write and work on. So stay tuned. There's this book coming up for you. There's Bibliobandido is contextualized within other projects. And if you want to be involved, I would warmly welcome that. You can create your own Bibliobandido. You can buy the book when it comes out, watch and support the documentary film, which we hope comes out in 2023, late 23 or 24. You can email me if you'd like to join my newsletter, or maybe you have a different way that we could work together. So yeah.
Thank you. Mimi, you have a question. Do you want to read it live?
I guess I could take organizers' privileges and ask the question live just to kick things off. And everybody feel free to post in chat if you have. There's been a lot of comments and appreciation, but if you have a question that you would like to pose, and we have Marisa for a few more minutes. So first of all, thank you so much. It's just such inspiring, but also joyful work. I mean, it was just such a pleasure to experience your world for a few minutes. But I have sort of a question on sort of the doing part is really just the partnership piece. I mean, how did you build these partnerships? I mean, you both do interdisciplinary partnerships, but also partnerships with communities that are quite culturally diverse and divergent. So I would just love your advice and how you pulled all this together, building these complex cross-cultural projects, and just how you negotiate your own positionality within these collaborations.
That's a good question. And I feel like, in my work, I have chosen to focus on youth, working families, and new immigrants and with, I feel like I'm, as someone who's Chinese and Ecuadorian and kind of negotiating, like many of us, it's a kind of a third culture kid. I'm interested in these, when I'm working with different communities, like immigrant communities, it helps me give a name to certain experiences that I didn't know was a thing, or I didn't even think about, but I didn't know how. So for example, I hear over and over from individuals when I'm working with domestic workers, oh yeah, well, I've been a nanny for 15 years, but I didn't know it was so widespread, or I didn't really think about it structurally, or my mother has been working for a domestic worker her whole life, but I didn't know that they were entitled to basic rights in the United States, or I just hadn't thought about it in this way before. So, for me, that helps me understand my own experience and give a name. And I'm interested in articulating, sharpening the vocabulary, but also, providing a visual language that is humorous and joyful and dignifying. And, you get all the issues baked in with it, but then you have, I believe that, a lot of the literature that I'm reading about mutualism, for example, or about community economies, or what I call pleroeconomies, is my critique of that is it's so logocentric and word-based and discursive, but I am a visual learner, and so many people are, and I really respond to exciting visuals. So so I feel like I draw on my own personal experiences to help me prioritize. And then what I look for is, I only work with communities that invite me. I'm not ever approaching people or like trying to convince them that they need art or humor per se. And I really look for individuals who know that they need creativity to help them achieve their own goals. And I find that there's often a kind of a synergy with people who feel comfort with the discomfort that creativity and all of its uncertainties can bring, and their own self-confidence. And I love working with people who are self-confident to, or in a position where they can make decisions, because there's so many bureaucratic structures out there that are worth avoiding. And it is really those collaborations that drive me forward. And a big shout out to one of my favorite collaborators, Juan Rubio, who is like so fun to work with, really great sense of humor. And we just co-taught this module on teen journalism in Seattle. So it's like I look for people who want to play.
And I see Juan is on one of the participants. So yeah, shout out to Juan.
There's a comment here in the chat just thanking you and asking. I'll let you think about it to share the slides. I have a question that as you talked about the Bibliobandido sort of migrating into different places, you said Massachusetts, there was a thing in Massachusetts and Canada. How do you think about the Bibliobandido as a character, as an idea, sort of changing and adapting as it sort of goes to those different places?
Yeah, so in answer to your question, I always encourage people, and as you, for example, if you look at the Bibliobandido website, there's a whole page on like how other people have adapted their character. So for example, in Canada, I'm excited because I'm connected to the library system there, and the curator of visual arts, who then is bringing on 2 Indigenous storytellers to help adapt it. So I love it when there's people enfranchised to do the adapting. And for example, I had a Q&A with some preliminary Zoom Q&A with some librarians, and they're like, well, we see that in Honduras, he rides around on a burro, and then, maybe here he could ride around on a buffalo when he's roaming around the plains. I'm like, oh my God, that's so great. And then, people, we were kind of talking about what are the key things that we need to preserve to make it look like the other character and kind of link them to this other legend, but adapt them. So they're planning to do kind of local beading, like, or give them like a beaded vest. So yeah, people are, I mean, for me as an artist or an educator, that's the thrill is in the adaptation of the legend, which is, you know, I think it's A.S. Bayat wrote about how genes and genies mutate, and that's how they are preserved.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on that? Because I was really just interested in how you created this openness to adaptation, and I think you called it porous authorial structures, immutable roles, and I could see like that it happened with the project, but like what is the, like how do you do that? Like what are the invitations you create? Is it stylistic? Is it how you interact with, I don't know. Again, just seeking advice because I think this is sort of a, you know, we talk a lot about like replicating or scaling projects. And I think what you have is a very different model, which is about co-creation and spread that is more generative of the cultural assets of varied groups and institutions. So just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, that's a good question. Sometimes I find out that someone's created the character, you know, we're like adapted the character, and that's a thrill. Sometimes, I mean, I've seen in some places where people are more reticent or conservative, and so then what's warranted is like high touch from me as the, you know, co-inventor of this villain to communicate my excitement. They have license to do this and show them how other people have already adapted. I mean, I think like that instinct, like sometimes I see kids watching the video, and like when we showed it, when it's shown in museums, kids will sit there and watch it like 6 times on repeat. There's a 6-minute video that I made, and they'll just watch it over and over. And there's something like, what's so interesting is they don't see, it's like their mind is split and they see kids making stuff and that excites them. They feel enfranchised, and they also see the story. And then I see them though starting to kind of innovate or think about what people, you know, there's something in the essay that's like lifting up the edge. And I feel like that's also in the other work that I do, where I'm interested, it's a political aesthetic, you know, aesthetic decision here. It's like, I'm interested in showing you a story and showing you how it's made, to indicate that it's always only humans like you who are co-creating this thing. So those aesthetic decisions, I think, well, that might be over attributing intentionality to those decisions, but I think there's a lot of, I don't know, I mean, maybe in the end, it's like there's some kind of conscious decision making that is communicating something.
John has what I think is a good closing question, which is what legacy do you want Bibliobandido to have, especially on both education and the arts?
That's a great question. I feel like, I mean, why am I bothered? I'm making this omni-channel platform, and I want to publish this book, and I want to make these webisodes of kids story crafting. And what I'm really excited about is kids having the sense of agency to shape their imaginative worlds, and for that to translate. That's like the kind of where the magic happens, and then that translates to a kind of civic agency as well. And I think what makes it really special is that it feels very homegrown. And, you know, you watch something like, you know, my son might watch something like Dora the Explorer, but it doesn't make you feel like, oh my God, it doesn't feel like you are implicated, and doesn't make me feel thrilled to be, like, get out of your seat and like walk 7 miles. That's my hope. And I, you know, I mean, I'm always like, so honored and touched when a library system reaches out to me and they're like, hey, we want this. I'm like, really, you do? You really do? Okay, great, let's play. So, and I think for the arts, it's like, I want people to feel that, I mean, I think there's something that's like kind of gritty and raw in the Bibliobandido narrative. They're always kind of like wackadoodle, these kind of like things that people, it's so funny. And I want that for people to have, to feel the depths of what the arts bring, and have things be as imaginative as they can be.
Great. I think we are out of time. Mimi, thank you for posting those links there to both the after event hangout that's coming up in 30 minutes, as well as a link to the survey. So thank you, Marisa, for sharing this. I've seen so many reactions coming up here. So in addition to all the questions, people have really appreciated the story you've told of the stories that others tell. So thank you for bringing that to us. And thank you all for the questions and participation. And hopefully we'll see some of you in 30 minutes.
Thank you.